Hi, it's Colleen Schmidt from Divination Counseling Service. I wanted to continue today with the study of fate and fortune through Hellenistic astrology, which is literally the study of the beginnings of astrology, or at least what they can scrape together. Okay. So, of course, before I begin, as always, I just want to say thank you for watching the video. I would like to particularly thank all of you who have been commenting, and especially the donors. So I, again, appreciate everything that you guys are doing to support this channel. If you're not a subscriber, I hope you'll consider becoming one. But if you would, like, share, and most particularly comment, because your commenting allows me to get to know you a little bit. And that is really the best part of doing this work. So with that said, I'm going to continue on with the Hellenistic astrology. I pretty much in the first version talked a lot about what it was and more or less how it came into being, particularly with regards to the school for astrology here in the United States at Kepler College. So, which is where Chris Brennan went to school. So, a couple of things I want to point out about the book. First of all, I probably will be doing more lectures from this book because I think that the information is very valuable. And if you did see the last video, you would know that I had thought about actually attending Kepler, but I come from a different kind of astrology. And I think that one of the most wonderful things about astrology, and one of the things I found most fascinating since I got involved in astrology, which was a really long time ago, is the fact that it is so diverse, that there are all different kinds of astrologers, and that astrology can be used for the stock market. It can be used for finance in general. It can be used with diurnals for gambling. I know people that have done that. I myself am a counseling, or have been for a really long time, a counseling astrologer. There are what I call mundane astrologers, which a lot of times they're also writing the political stuff because they are studying that. I always attributed Hellenistic astrology, though it is the study of the history of astrology. It is also, in my opinion, a lot of the Hellenistic astrologers have done the most work with regards to the ages, which is studying mundane astrology, but on steroids. So I always like to really talk to people about that because that is something that, particularly in this country where there's this close association of astrology to psychics and the occult, they forget that astrology is actually a science, and that it existed as an educational format for thousands of years. As a matter of fact, it's the perfect lead-in to what I want to talk about today, which is where I am with regards to the studying of this book. This particular book talks about the rise and fall of astrology. Well, if you can imagine, here's a subject matter that is literally thousands of years old. Thousands, okay? Some people would say 4,000 because they have stuff dating back that far. But really, who knows? Okay, so let me quickly start with not my notes, but just the stuff I wanted to sum up. There are chapters in here that I'm not really going to talk about at all. There was a whole chapter, I believe it's number 4, on the different astrologers, okay, and things they left behind and what year it was. And I found it to be a very interesting chapter, but A, can't say the names. They are a Greek. B, was it really their names? It seems to me that the more you come into the present, or you get into at least the common era, okay, you're not dealing with people who even use their own names, okay? Because of they wanted their work to look more valid. So if they used names like Hermes I'm really up into debate about even who wrote what. So and so obviously is the author, and so are many, many other people, because when you're going back thousands of years and they weren't even using their real name, it is really hard to talk about the people who wrote what. Okay, I think I did mention about Abram, as his name was written, but Abraham, the father of the Jews, and how he wrote a book. I think that, like I say, there's a whole chapter in here where he literally goes into where they were. I'm just going to kind of show you the writing. Okay, let me get my notes out of here. Where they literally go through the first century, and Dorotheus of Sidon, and I'm probably not saying it correctly, and he wrote in Greek. We don't even know that he was Greek, okay? Because A, he could have used a Greek name. B, anybody who was educated at certain points in history, in this particular point in history, would have spoke Greek, pretty much like the world speaks English today because of the internet. There is a common language that is found, and this goes on throughout history, and in this particular time, it's Greek. So I thought I thought of it as a chapter, and I kind of breezed through it because, they have birth charts that date back to 7 BCE that relate from 7 BC to 44 CE. So, right in at the change of the Common Era. Okay. So here, he does go into that. And then he goes on and he talks about people going all the way up until, I believe it was, and I'll tell you in a second, it wasn't really far, as a matter of fact. That was the other thing. So it was like the 500s, the 600s, and there's some things that, 500s, I'm looking at it. Okay. So, okay. All right. So let's talk about two things here. Oh, then there's 622. So it's more like the beginning first 700 or 800 years of the Common Era, okay, that he's writing about. And during this time, and I'm going to get to that in a second, this is when astrology is on a rise, okay? This is when the empires, all kings and Caesars, and they had astrologers. They were a part of the team, if you will. Okay. A lot of stuff happens after 500. So there are certain points in history. I think we're in one of them. So before I even go on, I think we're here. We're in one of these times. Around the 500s is when they rewrote the Bible. I know, isn't it funny? The Bible was not written when Christ was around. Okay. As a matter of fact, Christ didn't want any of this. This is actually the complete opposite of what Christ the man wanted. Okay. So, and I think that's something for all of us to think about. If you're a very religious person, because I do broach this question to people who are very involved in religion, that there is an idea here that by the use, and in this country lately, the misuse of the concept of Christianity and what it's being used for. And I'm going to say everywhere in the world, because didn't they have crusades? I just think that no one ever thought about what they're doing to this man's energy, his karma, I think we need to think beyond this little realm we're living in and think about more of the macrocosm of things. And I got to be honest with you, ever since I'm very young, although more so as I get older, it really does bother me what people do in the name of Jesus, the man, when Jesus didn't want any of this. I think about what would I feel like. And so, there's a connection from Jesus to God, yes, but there's a connection from all of us to God. Okay, at least I believe that way. I think that Jesus was here to teach us that very lesson, that we are all part of the Creator. Okay, so the created, okay, or however you want to look at the universal consciousness, okay? So that's been a real issue with me, okay? So a whole other tangent on this whole thing. I'm kind of been the logical astrologer my whole life. And to make a statement that I just made, that's pretty logical. And I am that way, that I do think of things in a very logical context. And I've been an astrologer since I'm 9. So, which is, I know that's weird in and of itself, but it affects how I think. So one of the things that I was really fascinated with is if in the 400s and in the 500s, even as we're going into the 600s, astrology is like so important. It is a cornerstone of the politics. It is a cornerstone in medicine. It's how they diagnose people, which we're kind of getting back into again, but that's a whole other subject. And I do want to mention that as a whole other subject matter, that, as I'm going through this book and I'm looking at some of this ancient, particularly the way it used to be. And I know that what I was studying at the time, instead of going to Kepler, I was actually studying medical astrology. And one of the things that I was learning and still learning, and I actually have worked on cases, is how much we can determine from astrology in terms of medicine. And how, because I use asteroids, how we can get details on medical issues that would literally blow your mind. I've blown people's minds. Okay? My teacher blows people's minds every day, all the time. So one of the beauties of me going back into this book is finding some of these older techniques that, as a ultra-modern, because I would be considered way into modern astrology being an asteroid astrologer, okay? There are a lot of traditional astrologers that don't really play so much with the asteroids. Some of them have literally feelings against them, okay? They really stick with tradition. That's good. Happy. Whatever makes you happy, wherever you think you can function the best. That's what you should do. And I, as a person who am fascinated with those asteroids, and I cannot tell you how much the asteroids have helped my practice as terms of me as a counseling astrology, let alone the medical cases that I've gotten involved in and the extraordinary things that I've been able to see in other people's charts. One of my favorite things to do is when someone gets cancer is to let them know that's not taking them down. I've been able to do that many times and it feels good. I might tell them other areas they better start watching out for, but that, first of all, there's a lot of information about cancer, and yes, there's a lot of information about cancer in medical astrology. So eventually I'll do medical astrology stuff because I have cases. And also one of the really cool things is that when someone's famous and they've died, you could still use their chart. They wouldn't be offended. And I'll give you an example. I just did a relationship chart and I did make note of all those health asteroids in there. I think I even said something. And I knew later that the James Gamble, for example, he had health problems, man. There's no way you could have that, even that little tiny sliver of the chart that I looked at, very sliver that I looked at, really did talk about this. But it also showed up in Proctor's chart, William Proctor's chart. Well, William Proctor's wife also, because he had it in his partnerships. He didn't have it so much that he was ill, but his wife was. And so this kind of aha moments, I didn't go into it in that video. I didn't really feel it was appropriate. I was talking about relationships. I wasn't talking about a chart. So when I go back and I start looking at this Hellenistic stuff, I am blown away by the fact that all doctors, all physicians, at one point in time in our history, were also astrologers. So and to know that my teacher is becoming somewhat famous in her work in medical astrology. I know that I've worked with her. I want to continue to work in medical astrology. I think it's a phenomenal subject matter, but it's just one of many things that I'm really so curious about. So one of the things that I noticed as my big question is, why is astrology poo-pooed? Okay. Now I'm living in a lifetime where in 1965, the Supreme Court reiterates the idea of voting rights for everybody. Okay, like, you can't discriminate against a person based on their color. And they try to make it so that there's civil rights and equality, and they really try to take care of all this. Okay. And now I've lived long enough to see them try to take it away. So what I'm getting at here is that when I was young, it was such a phenomenon to me that astrology wasn't considered a legitimate subject while I was young and growing up and was a little girl. And remember, I started studying at a very young age. I was very fortunate to have two very enlightened grandmothers. Okay. And it really bothered me that my question was always, do you believe in that? Okay, now I realize this is not true in other countries. So if you live in another country, you probably have never experienced this. And I hope you didn't. Okay. But this country, okay, like the whole Roman thing, and I'll get to that in a second, is so tied up in religion. And religion has been so, even though we say, and you will hear this from Americans, there's a division between church and state. No. Unfortunately, the religious right of this country, and I am going to put it like right, okay, like, I really do believe that they've had a real heavy hand on a lot of things in our lives. They kept alcohol prohibition for a while. And so you think about, I think the only other country I can say was definitely oppressed even more than us by religion was definitely Ireland. Okay, so religion has really played a huge role in whether or not astrology is acceptable. And the irony is that the actual decline of the Roman Empire is also considered the decline of the practice of Hellenistic astrology. In other words, when Rome started to fall, so did the whole idea of astrology. Although I do want to point out that we have had one modern day president, Reagan, did always use astrologers. I believe Hitler also did, but they were kind of, here we go, they were kind of being Cassandra or lying about it or however you want to look at it. But because he had a lot of astrologers in that country until he bombed cities, but we won't get into that. The idea of astrology and politics, however, is how tied they were when Rome was flourishing. And it does seem like because the country fell, astrology took a hit as well, which I thought was pretty interesting considering how intricately involved it was in its politics. Okay, so as a matter of fact, it said even by the 1st century already. Now remember that in other parts of the world, astrology continues to be very, very important. But where the Christians start taking realm, not the Muslims, because they ultimately, by the way, all of these astrologies were connected once. And anybody that practices Joyesh, if I'm saying it correctly, is practicing astrology, but another form of it. But ironically, they all come from the same place 4,000 years ago. But the Arab astrology is slightly different. They work only with precess times and things like that. But it is very interesting. I've worked with a lot of astrologers that might be looking at very different charts, but we always come, because their astrology is a little different, but we always come to the same or very similar interpretations, which I always thought was pretty amazing. But remember that they did have a lot of similar origins. And that is pointed out in the Hellenistic book. Okay. So here it is so about the first 100 years into the new or the common era. It's only the Gnostic Christian sects that have continued to incorporate astrology into their belief system. To this day, Swedenborgians, which are a Christian group, Swedenborgs, they still incorporate and have always included astrology, but these are smaller. These are not like Catholicism or even the Protestant church, which came out of Catholicism. So what happens is that as the Crusades are out there and as the Christians are kind of taking over everything, the only ones that are left are the Gnostics, and eventually they as a whole sect are marginalized and eventually stamped out by the Orthodox Christians. I did give you the big speech about Christ's karma, right? Okay, just wanted to say that. And I was prerequising what I was going to be talking about. The Christians felt that somehow, and they still do, and what's so ironic is astrology is very much a part of the quote unquote woke in what's going on, okay? Because astrology takes upon itself a very quote unquote woke, and I hope I get to it today because I'm talking too much already, a woke philosophy. All right. So if we're taking that very woke philosophy, we're trying to get to know ourselves. We are being Gnostics. We're doing self-study. Obviously, we're awake. Isn't it amazing? Now, this is again the United States. But I am under the impression that the alt-right is starting to infiltrate. Steve Bannon and Paul Manafort and all the types like that are out there infiltrating other democracies. And they're going to be using that wake or woke term in a really bad way, okay? For some reason, they don't want us to ascend. And I keep thinking, but you're Christians. Have you read the book of Revelations? Of course, I have. And ascending is a really good thing because it's telling us that we really are going into a new age, and we really are. So in any case, they still to this day feel it's a threat to them. We're going back almost 2,000 years. It's talking about how they even incorporated laws that restricted astrology, and some of them were beginning to be issued in 357, but they added more laws against astrology in 409 and 425 CE, ultimately banishing anyone from America out there. They banished the books. Where have you heard that before? And burned the books. They banished and burned the books. Okay, so I had to talk about this because I do live in America and we are living with this nightmare right now, okay? As a matter of fact, by the Middle Ages, in the European countries and in certain sections of the world, it almost completely ceases to exist. All those texts, stones, scrolls have been really hit into. Now, however, some of the material found its way to Egypt. And it lasted a bit longer in Egypt, but ultimately it falls out of favor in Egypt as well and is taken over by, and this happens when Egypt is ultimately taken over by Islamic forces. So you see that the really heavy fundamental religions have a really big issue with self-empowerment. And I am going to state it for what it is, because it has always been a marvel to me that Catholics are not encouraged to study even the Bible. That, I have a kind of a mixed religious background, and part of my background is Protestant, and they study the Bible. I'm not saying that it's good stuff they're studying, and I'm not saying the way in which they study or anything. Don't go there. But it always amazed me that my father's family, and I was also baptized into the Catholic religion, didn't do that, okay? Emphasis on the Bible. And me as a person who's very interested in history, always loved stuff like that. So of course I even actually took Bible study courses. So not so much because I was a religious Bible thumper, but because the Bible is one of the greatest sources of historically what was going on at the time, okay? Especially certain quotes or certain sections of the Bible, okay? So what happens is that astrology is like kind of being forced into underground. It continues in Persia, India, eventually is taken, eventually, here we go again, it's overtaken again by the Islamic forces. So as Islam grows, just like Christianity, it thumps down astrology. It just really feels to me, and it's such a shame because astrology was a part of religion for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But suddenly, because religion is becoming more political, and I think we all understand that, I think we all know that, it's not a judgment, it's just a fact, that as it becomes more political, push down anything that might empower people. Okay. I don't think you're going to be able to do that anymore in the Aquarian age. I think actually it's almost laughable that they're trying all this old stuff now, but they are doing it. Okay. So then India goes on and it has its own astrology that has its roots in Hellenistic astrology. And it even talks about how it's already 4,000 years old at this time. And that's almost, 2,000 years ago. So that just tells you how old astrology is, okay? Okay, so the Islamic calendar, so it's at least 1,500 years since even this, because this Islamic calendar actually begins in the year 622. It begins with the fight of Muhammad from Mecca, the flight. I always want to say fight, but there was no fight. It was a flight. He leaves. He goes from Mecca to Medina. And that's like when everything begins for them. In 762, Bangladesh becomes the new Alexandria. So what happens is that anybody who was able to grab a hold of things while the Christians are destroying, and then once the Islamic people move into Egypt, they have to do the same thing. And what they do is they just move it to India. So they take what they can get and gather, and they take it to Bangladesh. And that's where they begin that. Astrology makes a comeback in the Second Crusades, and not the first. And that's not until the 12th century. So that's literally several hundred years that from 622 or 660 to 760, it has to hide itself away in India. And then it's after the Second Crusade in the 12th century, when the Crusades become, when they start conquering here we go, this is the beginning of the Muslim lands in Spain. So you got this, and I know that some people are familiar with this constant back and forth between Christians and Muslims that went on also for a very, very long time. Well, apparently, when the Christians began to come back after the Second Crusades, okay, that's when they started to kind of look at that again. But I actually am going to point out another thing in a minute. During the comeback, they blended Indian and Hellenistic astrology along with Persian astrology. So remember now, these are two clearly distinctive forms of astrology, okay? The Jewish and the Western astrology, okay? Where I think of Hellenistic as Western astrology, but believe me when I tell you, Joyce also is a part of this kind of astrology, all right? Because they all come together around the 1100s, 1200s, okay? This is when astrology is, once again, this is actually when it's used big time in medicine and diagnostics. Okay, I think they did it in the beginning. All right, but this is when I think Kepler and a few of the other professional doctors were literally, officially, quote unquote, astrologers. Now, one of the things I do want to talk about that when astrology comes in and it starts to make its comeback, it does so in medicine and diagnostics. And the irony of ironies is that my teacher's been involved in asteroids since the 80s. I came onto the scene in the early 90s. I've been studying asteroids ever since. But she started writing books by the 90s because I visited a lot of her lectures, especially in the early 2000s, on medical astrology, again being a diagnostic tool for doctors. And she actually has spoken to medical groups. Her name is Martha Lang Westcott. She does Treehouse Mountain astrology, that's what it's called. And she is the renowned astrologer for particularly the asteroids, but in particular medical asteroids. Okay. Now, the astrology concept then begins to flourish during the Renaissance. That's when a lot of things begin to flourish. Now, something I missed here. Around the 500s into the 600s, that's when there's a lot of oppression that comes into the scene. That's when the religious groups begin to try to, I want to say, rule the people in whatever way they can. That's when they start to butt into politics. Because now the people are living in cities and a lot of places are not so tribal and yada da and yada da. Okay. In the 1600s, in the 16th century, so it's 1500s, we have what's known as the Age of Reason, or as it's referred to in astrology, if you watched the Changing of the Gods, I love the way they put it, the Age of Modern Thinking. Now, I think we're in one of those again. And this is what I was alluding to earlier. I think they're going to call what we're doing, this is a point we're at right now, where prior to this date, it's going to be one thing, and then on to the next date, it'll be something else. And I think that we're in one of those phases, okay, where they're going to rename it. But for the sake of what we're doing here, if you understand that by this 1500s, the 16th century, okay, people are now thinking differently because we're evolving now, okay? This is why you really can't judge people in history because they're really not the same as we are. We always evolve. We go through these periods where all of a sudden we do a kind of a jump. Well, they did a jump when they got oppressed we'll look at that, the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages actually, or the Middle Ages. But they come back when you start to have modern thought and modern thinking. Well, then you get into the next one they talk about is during the Renaissance. And this is a big rise of a lot of things. By the 17th century, because of politics and social issues, the science of astrology once again sees a decline. They did. Okay. Now, why? This they do blame on social issues, science, politics. I think too, because it is the Renaissance, because there's so much going on that astrology maybe even takes a backseat. Okay. However, okay, it flourishes again in England by the 1800s. We have William Lilly. Okay. Now, what happens in this time? Now, remember, astrology's gone through so many political wars, politics, social issue. I mean, this poor science has just been through the ringer. It really has. It's existed for thousands and thousands of years, and it goes through these things where it becomes the bastard child, okay? What's so weird is when it finally comes back in the 1800s, it comes back, like especially in like 1880s, it comes back through the Golden Dawn as a secret. The only way you can learn astrology is like it was back in one of the original, like thousands of years ago. You have to be initiated. It's not open for the general public. You have to be a part of these groups or whatever. You have to be a part of the Golden Dawn. You have to be a part of the society. You have to know, Rider, Waite. There are two people, Rider and Waite. They were all part of the Golden Dawn. Of course, anybody who studies tarot, anyone who knows anything about the tarot cards, they're all part of the Golden Dawn. They all came back with this renaissance of astrology and all of those factors. And by the way, that stuff was really popular in the first half of the 20th century. It's being written about, especially as you get into the 20s and then into the 30s. It just begins. By the time I'm growing up, it sees a great renewal in particularly the 70s, the 60s a little bit, but the 70s. But even in the 60s is when I think Alan Leo comes on the scene, and you get this whole movement of what they call the holistic astrologers, or they're modern. I'm looking because there's a whole title on these things. So in any event, I do want to talk about how Hellenistic astrology, as this book is written, is the basis of how we in Western astrology use astrology. And it was developed and practiced where there's so much diversity in it. And I think that's why I didn't even bother going through the chapter of all the different astrologers. The diversity is philosophical. So as well as just all these different cultures, okay? And when it began, it is a form of divination. And anyone who doesn't know what divination means, it is like divining, predicting the future. And so it really was set up that way. Okay. And I'm going to give you an example. I thought this was really interesting. They only had the night sky. We don't even have a night sky compared to what these people had. And they pointed out that Venus and Jupiter, I think it is, I'm going to do my notes here. Venus and Jupiter are both considered beneficial or benefic. Okay. And Jupiter and Venus are also in the night sky, very, very white and bright. Okay. So they're coming up with this stuff through almost logical means. Then they look at Mars as red and rather dark. And they see Saturn as brown and dark. So when they decide to assign benefit, malefic, or positive, negative, you got to understand. So let's start by straight out to just factual stuff. There is no all good, all bad in astrology. And it's interesting that in Hellenistic astrology, they also try to explain that even though a planet might be of a benefic, if depending on how it's placed in a chart or what it's in proximity to, takes away, or even what sign it's in, can take away of some of that benefit. By the same token, you can have things that are more negative, malefic, and they too would be altered by what sign they show up in, just like we do astrology. Okay? And remember, they are the basis of what we do. So the original term is Helios for the sun, which is considered a fiery, light, intelligent type energy. Selene is the moon, who is reflection of light. And they're both considered neutral. Okay? Hermes is Mercury, the twinkling one. He's considered neutral, but he's also very impressionable because he takes on the energy of whatever is around him. Aphrodite is Venus, the light bearer. Aries is Mars, the fiery one. Zeus is Jupiter, the radiant one. Kronos is Saturn, the shining one. So their original Greek names were Helios, Selene, Hermes, Aphrodite, Aries, Zeus, and Kronos. Now, what's interesting and should be considered here is that we use Selene, the name, for something else, still related to a moon, but actually the white moon. Hermes is an asteroid. Aphrodite is an asteroid. Zeus is not only a trans-Neptunian, but an asteroid. Kronos is not only a trans-Neptunian, but an asteroid. So these names are still being used today. What we did was we kind of spread them out, sort of like they did with rulerships. You know, these particular Hellenistic astrology texts relate to everything up till Saturn. They didn't really use anything after Saturn. You go to original charts and they're only working up till Saturn. And I am going to show books on that. The truth be told is that Uranus, at one time Aquarius was co-ruled with Saturn with Capricorn. Okay, so Saturn and Aquarius both used Saturn as what ruled them. And then when they come across the new planets, they were able to redistribute the rulers. Okay. Well, in astrology, we did the same thing in many respects. That's how our asteroids got named. Okay, so this is also, in many respects, the basis, the shining one, the radiant one, the fiery one, the light. Okay, all of those in context, in some respects, we still use today, but with modifications. And the modifications are, in essence, that Aphrodite and Venus are actually two different things now. But they still act in a similar way, okay? The other thing that I quickly wanted to go through, I have a choice. I don't want to talk much longer, but I also wanted to just really quickly, and I'll pick this up and talk about diurnal and nocturnal charts at my next one. I'll circle that. I just want to start before I get to the sun and moon. When it comes to Mercury, think of Mercury as a companion to the sun, which we all do, because it always is somewhat close to it. And that it's thought to originate, the concept of Mercury, even the name of Mercury, is thought to originate with the idea of the mercantile or the merchant. Sales is what I put into parentheses, because it is also associated with scribes, grammar teachers, public speakers, orators, okay? And it's also said that Mercury is able to literally sidetrack us from our goals. So Mercury the trickster is even played out, and that's more modern language, but it's even played out through this. The other, okay, now I'm only going to do like I did for that. Basically, when it comes to the planets, in astrology, in Hellenistic astrology, they are referred to as the wandering stars because they move. Fixed stars don't move very much. So they kind of are where they are in the sky. But wandering stars are what Hellenistic astrology is based on, is what we refer to as the planets. So basically, I did explain that the sun is the fiery, intelligent light. It's the instrument of perception with regards to the soul. Okay, so it's like our outer layer, if you will, that covers up the soul. It's in a nativity, it signifies kingship, authority, mind intelligent, form, motion, height of fortune, dealing with the gods, judgments, how engaged you are in public affairs, actions, leadership. So, it's the father, it's the body. Okay. Now in medical astrology, you would not need always a really good time. It's good to have a good time because you can get a lot more information. But if you didn't have a time, and I have worked on charts, where do you see the general body to even know where there might be a problem? It's the sun. Well, apparently in Hellenistic astrology, nothing's changed. Now, in this case, they do say that it rules the head and, the torso and all of that. But I got to be honest with you, a lot of that changes as we begin to add in more planets. So I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on it. I did want to talk about the reflection of light. They also call it counterfeit light. Now, on the moon, the moon's now. In the nativity, it signifies a man's physical life, the body, the mother, the conception of the baby, appearance, living together lawful or unlawfully in terms of marriage, nurse, older siblings. So they're the queen, the mistress of the house. So a lot of stuff that we use today. The difference is that they say she rules the left eye, the sun rules the right eye, stuff like that we don't do as much anymore. She's also to rule the stomach, the breasts. I think she still does. The breath itself, no, I think that goes to Mercury now. So you see what I mean? There's a lot of things have changed. It's almost like what you want to do is look at the old way and then look at the new way, which is something that I was doing a little bit when I was working on the original video of the diurnals, because our rulers have changed. And, some people say you have to go by the old rulers. No, you don't. I think you need to go by whatever kind of astrologer you are. As a modern astrologer, I put all the bells and whistles in there because I understand all the bells and whistles. So I think that as astrologers, that is our job. We should continue to add into what it is that we're doing. Saturn is considered Chronos. And again, there is a real Chronos. So we kind of divide some of this up between Chronos Saturn and Chronos. But it talks about those being born under him as petty, malicious, having many anxieties, solidarity, deceit. That's not what we think of as Saturn today. We think of Saturn as organization, managerial, executive ability. But they're talking about how people can be austere and conceal their deceit, squalid. Anyone with a good disciplinary is the last thing they are, squalid. So think again, this is the old stuff. That's why I didn't want to spend much time on it. I think it's interesting to look at. Some of it we do still use today. Some of it we broke away from. When we get to Saturn, Jupiter, I don't really agree. So I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time there. And that's what I think we have to do as astrologers. I'm not saying that they're wrong. No, I think that it's like the cards. You pick up the vocabulary because you work with it all the time. So when I see a certain card, I see a certain thing. It just comes to me. Because I've been working with the cards for 40 years, 50 years. So I know what that card means to me. It doesn't matter if it doesn't mean the same thing to the next person. Generally speaking, we're all in the same realm, but there is a degree of diversity in all things like this, and that includes astrology. So the star of Jupiter signifies the begetting of children. I think only when you got Jupiter in the fifth, but here we go again. It talks about childbirth, the desire for love. I think of Jupiter as justice. So you see where I'm going with this. It talks about friendships, but there is abundance. There is payments, large gifts. Those things do apply. Justice, thank you. Authorities, government, honors, heads of holy places. And, I can see all that. So again, there's a lot I do agree with. So I think it's really interesting. And then you get to Mars, and Mars is about robbery, screams, insolence, adultery. See, it's a little excessive, okay? I mean, yeah, maybe with Pluto, but oh, that's right. They didn't have a Pluto. So they had to put the capacity captivity, raping of women, okay, abortions, sexual intercourse. Again, Mars, yes, it is a sexual sign, but rape? Again, not unless there's a Pluto. I really, you have to, like, for me to have some of these things happen would take more than just one deity. One planet couldn't make it happen. So that's where I had a little bit of a problem. Imprisonment, torture, those are all under Mars. Okay, Aphrodite, I do agree with. Desire for love and desires. Yes, I think Venus has a lot to do with our desires. Signifies the mother and the nurse. I would put moon there, but that's me. Okay. Priesthoods, wouldn't. Public benefactors, wearing of golden ornaments, the wearing of crowns, merriment. Yes, I do think friends and social life are under Venus, but some of this other stuff, purchasing of ornaments. Yeah, a lot of that is because Venus has a love of art and beauty. So, but then they actually talk about painting, mixing of colors, embroidery, purple dyeing. You got to take into consideration the time there. Okay. And then you get to Mercury, which is education, writings, but it's also disputation, speech, brotherhood, interpretation, the office of and I agree with that. Okay, that'd be like even newspapers, because they are very Mercury. So a lot of that I do agree. Youth, I totally agree. Theft, I do agree. Community, messages. So here I do agree with a lot of it. Service, profit. No. See, right away I go into stuff that's like, well, now we're pushing it. Now we're pushing it. And I got to be really honest with you before I let you go. I am going to get off because, my goodness, how long? Oh, yeah, get off. But before I go, I do want to say that one of the things that is very important, and to me, and the reason why I got involved in asteroids was because when you're talking just planets, I do believe that sometimes astrologers tend to push boundaries on what something means. Okay. I think Neptune is my biggest. Pluto maybe is really up there. And I think that they put a lot of meaning on Neptune that maybe would be coming from something else. And when I hear traditional astrologers, and that some of them are quite excellent, so don't get me wrong, but that's where I have a little issue. Because I am an asteroid astrologer, I know the kind of details that we can get from asteroids. And it just, every time, even reading this book, it just makes me so grateful that I'm an asteroid astrologer, because I don't have to push the boundaries ever. Just like doing that relationship chart and that health stuff, just literally, I'm not lying when I say it jumped off the page at me. And that's what happens when you look at things a lot. Things start, okay? And I was right. And the reality is I didn't have to talk about it because I didn't think it was applicable to the subject at the time. But what I'm getting at is that I didn't even want to look at that, and it popped up. And that's what I mean by the details. And I feel like sometimes when people don't deal with asteroids at all, they really miss so much, and they put too much importance on things like Neptune and Pluto, and when really it can be explained away by an asteroid. So enough said. Whew, boy, do I talk. Next time I'm going to be picking it up with what's known as the sex, which means night or day, diurnal. Isn't it funny we call them the diurnals, the daily charts? But there's a difference in the old astrology between day and night, which always fascinated me. And the irony is that it actually has grown in popularity over the last 20 years. So it's one of those coming back things. So with that said, thank you for watching this video. I hope it was informative. And if you would, as always, please comment. I'd love to hear from you. But as always, I leave you as I always do. Until we meet again, I wish you all only happy readings. Take care.